I haven't got the capacity, but I am giving all that I have got. How do you reflect and respond to that instead of I call it done?
Jill, do you want to capture one or two comments? More comments?
Yeah,
yeah.
Hi, I'm Marianne Hayward. I think in our group we were all self-supporting ministers, and we all like what you said about the flexibility of different seasons, there being times that are busier in different places. Several of us wanted to challenge the idea that it's harder if you're in full-time step-entry ministry and doing one thing rather than multiple things. And I think as a minister in sector employment myself, for me the particular challenge is that my time is all double counted. My work in the NHS is my ministry, and that frankly makes all of the discussion about working agreements and time, which is all focused around the parish, which isn't where my primary ministry is, it makes it much more complicated and actually often quite laughable. I'm not sure where I want to go with that, but I suppose I just want to say, actually, this is a lot more complicated than we sometimes think it is. And I think there are similar issues for people with families, with caring responsibilities, with things that we don't label necessarily as ministry, but are actually a core part of what they're doing.
Thank you. Can you just say your name?
Marianne Hayward.
You take one more?
Hi, I'm Tim Solozzi. We mentioned about how there are a number of secular jobs, such as teaching and the NHS, that will work people with good reason and with the best intentions beyond their capacity to the point that they are getting sick. I wonder if there is a place where we can get ourselves in such a good position with mental health and wellbeing and boundaries with the way that we work, where we can be a voice that is helpful to the way of organising our lives.
Thank you. Shall I start there? I mean, let me just say again, I'm no expert. These are ideas that we're sharing. So it's good to hear your reflections as well. I think at our best, that's kind of what I was trying to suggest. At our best, we have a gift to offer the wider world, but we struggle to live that way in order to model something that might make others sit up and think, oh, okay, there is a way of living and fulfilling responsibility that doesn't need to destroy us. So absolutely, I think that's at the heart of our calling, and that's what we're striving towards and to be. In turn, there are things that we've learned from some of those professions, or we are learning, and we haven't been so good at putting into our practice. So the idea of having supervision, for example, I mean, I know as those in training, you have it and you kind of have to have it. But once you're let loose, as it were, post your curacy or post your training period, it's up to you then. And now a lot of other professions, it's just normal practice. It's what everybody does. We're not so good in the church, and quite a lot of people resist it, actually. If you suggest it, it's kind of heard in terms of, oh, do you think I'm not good enough then, that I can't do this by myself? So there are things we can learn from some of those professions and take them really seriously and take them on board. But at our best, Tim, that is exactly what I think. But I'm not sure we're very good at modelling it. We kind of know it, but I'm not sure we believe it in such a way that it impacts how we are and how we minister and how other people experience us. That's it. But I'm with you all the way on that. Marianne, thank you for your point. I don't think I was wanting to suggest that it's hard, that anything is harder. So please forgive me if that's the impression I gave. I think what I wanted to say was, I think that when ministry is part of, or when ministry and church or your responsibilities in church is part of a wider suite of responsibilities through whether it's your employment or whatever, and we don't have the same call on your time, it is and should be easier to set boundaries in the church and say, actually, I'm not available for Wednesday afternoons, because on Wednesday afternoons I do something else. I think that should, if it's not, it absolutely should be. And for our SSM ministers, actually we owe you that. We owe you a higher degree of flexibility. So I wasn't wanting to say that your lives are less complicated, far from it. But I was saying the idea of saying that I can boundary ministry and say that on a Tuesday I'm looking after my grandchildren, so I'm not available. That should be more straightforward. It might not always be in practice, but it should be. Whereas I think there are more complex questions for those who are full-time. So yeah, not about diminishing or saying that your lives are any less complicated. Gary, thank you. Yes, so I'm interested to know, when you say the leadership team, were you meaning like the diocesan bishop's leadership team, or were you meaning leadership team as in your training incumbents and area deans and so on?
Yes, I'm thinking across the DOS and leadership team.
Okay.
So that template for how to manage yourself, be sustainable, is set, but also recognising that what's said as we expect you to manage yourself for sustainable ministry, but when people are doing that, to recognise they are doing that, and that's an acceptable way of going forward. So how do you respond to that when people say, I can't actually do that, I haven't got capacity, and if I go that extra step to do that, I am actually going to burn out. So is it recognised that that's acceptable within that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would agree with you that how the kind of diocesan leadership team or the bishop's leadership team, the archdeacons, the area bishops, myself, and so on, we will be much more effective in this area through what we model than through anything that we say. And those who sit around the leadership team in this room, which I think might just be Rob and I, Rob will know that we've talked about this, and I've said it on several occasions, how we show up outside the meeting as a leadership team, modelling the things that we're talking about, whether we know it or not, will have more of an impact on the culture of the diocese than any ad clarum or anything that any of us says. The grit, if you like, it is that, of course, we each know ourselves best. And we know if we're nearing the end of our resources and we need to stop, we need to stop. And we need to take some time to go on retreat or to have a couple of days extra off or whatever it is. We also have to be wise and listen to those around us. You see, in the church, in the context of ministry in the church, it's very possible to go to either extreme. It's very possible, and this is what most people do, to overwork and to push yourselves to limits that are unreasonable. It's also actually, and we do have some like this, relatively few, it's also possible to be quite lazy, actually. And once you get to a place where, you see, patterns of accountability are not at all clear in the church, there's an awful lot of space for discretion, and very few people can force you to do anything you don't want to do. That's where the wisdom comes in, and the need to work collaboratively with colleagues to be able to determine where that line is and how you're navigating through what might be hard work, but is acceptable and might be demanding, and something that's taking you to an unhealthy place, to being in the red zone. And then, absolutely, I hope that the culture of diocese will be one that those who might have responsibility towards you can then help you say, yes, because we're working collaboratively, others can now step in and give you a little bit of space to go on retreat or whatever it is. So it's a two-way thing between our own personal responsibility, cultivating a culture where we care for one another, and crucially where we notice that somebody might be struggling, and not just notice, but do something about it, pick up the phone or ask them or offer a conversation over a coffee or whatever it is. And where each of us also takes note of what others are saying to us. So I don't know whether that goes some way to
Yes.
answering some of what you said. Thank you.
Bishop Guli, can I ask a question and a follow-on?
In relation to that, so in the small group that I was part of this morning, after we'd had the panel, people said that they felt encouraged to be quite vulnerable in our small group and to be quite honest, because people who were their peers or just one step ahead of them as their peers, so recently left QSC and fairly recently started as incumbents, were incredibly honest and open and vulnerable. But people also voiced within the small group their fear that they could not be vulnerable with their more senior leaders. And I don't know, and I probably should have asked whether that included myself and Andy and Ian, but certainly people were speaking of their archdeacons and their bishops, and they talked about the fact that it's because in curacy you have this sort of dual kind of relationship, and people are very aware both of that sense that there is a pastoral care of them and understanding that, but also seeing that people are also assessing them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's another one of those paradoxes. When I was IME2 officer, I started exactly the same time as new rules and regulations came in about the curate training and the need for review and assessment, and in particular sign off at the end. And I remember kind of struggling with this whole question, that if I was involved in review and assessment, could I also be responsible for pastoral care? I mean, notwithstanding the fact that the primary pastoral relationship is probably with the training incumbent. And I did toy with the idea of separating them off completely and of saying, you know, the people responsible for review and assessment shouldn't be responsible for pastoral care. It's another one of those fixed boundaries that I don't think entirely works, because the best kind of review and assessment is done in a context of honesty and transparency, and should allow for appropriate vulnerability. And you know, frankly, we're failing, or it's a recognition of our brokenness as a system if we can't allow for that. I know that many people who are called to ministry, ordained or otherwise, many people who are called out of their vulnerabilities. It will be some experience or experiences that have been profoundly difficult at some stage in life, which has, you know, done its work to bring you to this point. So we'd be foolish to say that we want people who have no vulnerabilities. That's neither biblical, nor is it spiritual, nor does it make any sense. You know, it's not common sense either. So it is difficult, and it's about, perhaps it's about that currency of trust. I wonder, and this is something I've said more publicly and elsewhere, I think that that currency of trust at the minute is missing in some ways, or it's not as strong as it should be in our diocese. And so we need to work on developing that. And as we know, trust takes a long time to develop, and then one small thing can bring it crashing down. But the flip side of the coin is that we are also accountable. Our accountability structures aren't as strong as in other organisations, but we do have to be accountable to one another. And the truth is that if someone is really struggling, if they're struggling to the point of not being able to fulfil their responsibilities, it is our responsibility to say, is this too much for you? Because if we don't spot that during curacy or in the early years, it will only come back to do greater damage at a later period, either to individuals or to congregations that they're serving. So it is our responsibility not to ensure that you're perfect and you have no vulnerabilities or no areas where you need support, but to know that in order to help you put in place the support you need to enable you to grow the sustaining ministries. So these are really complex areas. And I'm grateful for this conversation because I don't want to suggest there are any easy answers. And very, very seldom are there black and white easy answers. So if you do this, then you've got it right. Which is why we need to go on talking, having conversations. That's what your supervision time with your incumbents and your training incumbents is about, exploring these areas. How do we appropriately share vulnerability and provide support for one another and develop trust?
Thank you. And perhaps take another few, so I'm going to go to Janetta, and then there, and then there.
Janetta Brathwaite. My question is about the rest day. We are urged and sort of forced to take a rest day, but I'm not sure what is involved in the rest day, because maybe the clergy will take time off from that or whatever, but your parishioners don't know, and they're expecting you to be on duty all the time. And you yourself don't know, because do you just divorce everything from church? And what do you do? What is the rest of it involved?
Great question.
April Juice. This actually follows on a bit from what Janetta just said. I was wondering about how the well-being and looking after ourselves plays out in a parish context, when actually you can, I think, sometimes face a bit of purse lips, to put it mildly. Sometimes if you're maybe going on a retreat or having a week off, there is that feeling that there's a bit of disapproval. What are you doing? Shouldn't you be around?
Julia Lacey. I want to go back to something you said about clarity and transparency is the word. I appreciate what you said about needing clarity and needing control, and that is not always possible. And yet, I feel sometimes in our earthly and worldly ways, we need a certain kind of clarity. Not knowing what happens in 10 years' time is probably not so necessary. But I have a feeling that in the last 2 years, I'm a second-year curate, and I think this might be a reflection on having become a curate during the pandemic. I'm new to the diocese, I don't know that many people, but I'm very puzzled by leadership structures and by the transparency, thank you. Just checking out anything. By the transparency, and to me, frankly, the lack of transparency in structures. There seems to be in my first and in these first 18 months of the curacy, there seem to have been a number of very puzzling decisions having been made without being clear who made them, why they were made, and how, when they affect me and my colleagues, how can I appeal, or to whom, because I don't know where it's coming from.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Julia. I'll come back to that in a minute. Let me address the first 2 points, which, as you say, were connected. I think my kind of common answer to both is talk to parishioners. I think sometimes we, again, it's partly about this not wanting to share our vulnerabilities. It's partly because we think they may not understand, partly because we think there's no appropriate place in which to do it. But I think sometimes it comes from a lack of understanding. It's like anything, isn't it? If we don't understand another's life, we might make all kinds of assumptions about them. And the common one is that clergy only work on Sundays. That comes from a lack of understanding. The clergy wellbeing covenant that I referred to, which isn't perfect, you know, we could sit and critique it easily, and I'm sure we will, particularly when it comes to diocese and synod. But that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to say we need to have conversations, clergy with clergy, clergy with parishes, and indeed clergy families, arguably, and of course lay ministers likewise as well. So talking to develop understanding is one approach. Patterns have changed. Sometimes patterns just change over time. You think of the conventional vicar's wife as it used to be. And the vicar's wife, there were all kinds of expectations heaped on what the vicar's wife would and wouldn't do. Now, at no point in time did that suddenly change, but it has shifted over time. There are some parishes aside, but generally speaking, there are virtually no expectations now of spouses or partners. They can choose how or if they want to be involved. So I think some of these things take time, and we need to help educate, if you like, or help congregations and people understand better that we're also human beings, and we can only go for so long without a break. Now that brings us on to how do you enjoy your time off? Or what do you do in it? I mean, you know, there is no one set question to that. What is it that gives you life? What do you enjoy doing? For me, it's not about saying that it means I cannot, you know, I cannot set eyes on somebody that is connected to my work. You might go shopping, for example, and end up having a conversation or whatever it is. But it's ensuring that you try to do some of the things that are life-giving to you in that time. For some people, the strictness of a day off is really, really important. Others can inject elements of what might be life-giving in different ways. And this is back to developing patterns that work for you and that are sustainable in the long term. There is no straight answer. Some people find they have to get out of the parish in order to be able to relax and wind down. Some people, you know, batten down the hatches and get a book and light the fire and stay in and don't answer the door. Whatever it is you need to do, go for a run, meet up with friends, have family around. You know, there is no answer. And I think it's one of the reasons that can lead to burnout, because we forget sometimes. We end up forgetting how to have fun. We forget what are the things that life, what were the hobbies that I used to once upon a time enjoy, that life is now so busy that I never spend any time on. And then several years down the line, you realise that you've actually lost the ability to relax. And that's then when the danger really creeps in. So again, a broad, complex answer, but a very good, important question. Now, Julia, the need, yes, absolutely. And well, what you started to say was one thing, and it got to somewhere else. So let me try and address them differently. When I say being able to live with uncertainty and complexity, that's the uncertainty and the complexity that exists beyond what we have control over and have agency over. And those things, of course, are important. We all need to feel that we have a degree of control and agency. But for all of us, whoever we are, whatever our roles in life, there comes a point at which we have no control. Unknown events, uncertainties. And that's what I mean about practicing surrender to God. It's saying, that let me take responsibility for all areas of my life where I can. But when I get to the point that I no longer have control, that I can't shape things, that I can't control events around me, let me surrender to God and say, all will be well and all manner of things will be well. So it's very. Now, in terms of structures in the diocese, I'm assuming here that you're referring to some particular decisions about the organisation and sustainability of parishes long term and so on. And I want to be really careful in what I say here. I'm relatively new here. I'm conscious that at the minute, probably by most people, I'm still being looked at as someone who maybe will have some solutions. to problems that haven't been of my making because I'm too new here. Very soon, I'll be creating the problems and people will be pointing the finger at me and I'll be clearing up, if you like, or trying to tidy up my own mistakes. I'm really realistic about that. At the same time, I am absolutely not in the business of pointing fingers at any of my predecessors or those who still work alongside me. You know, I'm playing my part now, and I've said this before publicly, for good or ill, the past has brought us to where we are now, and our task, my task and yours now is to look ahead and say, okay, this is where we are. Some of it's been really painful, some of it may have been misjudged, some of it may have been wrong, but where do we go from here? So I don't want to point fingers, but I do want to recognise that some of the decisions that were made with the best intentions have backfired and have left us with a great deal of pain and hurt and uncertainty, partly because there's been a lack of consistency in the way that any decisions that were made have been kind of put into practice more widely. Let me just say, because you know this is tricky territory. Let me just say that one of the priorities in my mind at the minute is the developing of relationships on the bishop's leadership team. Not that they're bad. Please don't hear that they're bad or negative. But what I recognise is that for any organisation, and a diocese in a sense is an organisation, how the leadership team operates is really significant. We've already said this. It plays into the wider culture, whether we know it or not. So I'm often speaking to my close colleagues and saying, let's have the difficult conversations here and let's have them honestly and openly, without fear. You know, everything under the table needs to be on the table. Let's say whatever we need to say. But once we've made our decisions, let's then agree to a level of consistency of how that's communicated and how we show up outside the meeting. Now, that again on paper sounds great. It's always going to be messier because everybody in the church, and this is something I've spoken about as well, everybody in the church, from the area bishops, archdeacons, area deans, clergy and lay leaders, and the person who's sitting on the pew. Every one of those has their own discretion. I can't force anybody to do anything. That's the truth of it. There are very few levers in the church to ensure consistency of practice or make anybody do anything. The only lever really, or the main lever I have, or any of us have, are our relationships. Building trust and demonstrating to one another that we're all on the same side, we trust one another, we love one another, and we want the best for the diocese. But it takes time, and it's not perfect, and I can't do it on my own. It requires all of us. In terms of where you take any concerns you have, training incumbent, area dean, archdeacon, area bishop, diocesan bishop, Dean of Mission and Ministry, IME advisors. We're all contactable. We've all got emails, and any of us, we have a right to ask for a meeting with. So let me leave that with you. I can't spend my entire time meeting with every individual. But I do spend a proportion of my time doing it. Don't fear.
Thank you. Is there any one more burning question? And then I think we probably need a tiny pause before we go to stuff on. Stuff is at 6, right? Yeah.
6:30.
Oh, 6:30, okay, that's fine. Maybe I take more questions.
Jenny Pratt. As a licensed minister, I would like to know how I can help my incumbent not to be in a position where he is burnt out. I don't know how to help him when he is responsible for so many things that I can't help him with.
I don't know which your parishes or who your incumbent is. This is back to the thing about we can't fix other people's problems for them. We do need to cultivate an environment which makes it possible for people to look after themselves well. But also as individuals, we have to take our own responsibility. We have to ask for help. There is no shame in asking for help. I never knew a curate or an incumbent or anybody who asked for help and was judged badly on it. But we have to be willing to ask for it. We have to ask for help. We have to reach out to those who are reaching out to us. We have to trust our colleagues, share the load. And sometimes we get to the point where we just have to stop. And this is back to the, in ministry, it's in many other areas of life, but in ministry, the work is never done. It doesn't matter how hard you work, it'll never be complete. So we may as well be much more accepting of ourselves that, yeah, I will fail in some things. I won't do some things well. I will pick up. I will have to stop at points and let people down. I will disappoint people. I've said that publicly. I will disappoint people because I'm human. And, perhaps I really don't know, because I don't know the person, but you can offer support, you can offer help, but they have to be willing to accept it and look for their own support structures. Without knowing the details, it's very difficult to say too much more.
Bishop Hulley, Father McPherson, can I thank you because prior to my ordaining life, I was in the army, and the motto of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst is "Serve to Lead," and I think that's something that we don't often talk about enough. Is the servant of not just of ordained lay ministers, but of all of us as Christians. I wondered, and it's probably the big question to finish with, but how much of your sort of strategic vision for the diocese is focused on that servanthood approach? And how might that focus towards the other things you've been discussing today?
Thank you. Did you say Matthew?
Yes.
Yeah, Matthew. Jill, there's one other person here. Should we take that?
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm an LLM, and my question was actually, we have a very good team in our area. But our biggest challenge is actually our PCC, accepting the licensed ministers to do what they can, like services of word, to take the burden off of our ministers. And we've been integrating for a year, 2.5 years. We now have a team that's a company. But the pandemic actually helped because we were able to close churches, which took off some of the burdens. We've got 3 churches and one has the duty priest, and obviously someone who works full time. They're not as a priest, except your job. And whenever we put forward, well, actually, you want 3 churches open, one of them would be a service of the word, we get told no. And it's, we are here to support our ministers, but we're not being able to because the congregations or PCCs. And I just wondered if you have a big price.
Yeah. It's a curse of clericalism. We need clergy, but we need to find ways of not just honouring our lay ministers, but acknowledging that actually the local church really belongs to the lay people, to the people of God, of which clergy are also part. But by and large, clergy are transitional, not always, but by and large, clergy are transitional. Lay people are there through thick and thin and for many, many, many years. Again, I think it's about education. And unfortunately, again, I have no power or leverage over PCCs, but do talk to area deans and archdeacons. It can be like some of the other things we've talked about. It can take time. It's about educating, and it's about helping people understand the changing nature of church. I think there's a lot of fear around. So much is changing in life that a lot of people can project onto the church. As long as the church stays unchanging, then they feel reasonably secure. So if the church is changing as well, and that's the whole point about surrender to God. And I think it's my response, Matthew, to you as well. I'm not someone who's come with a great strategic plan or a clarity of vision. I'm absolutely convinced that this is our shared responsibility as a diocese to discern the direction of travel. I think that's the best we can do. You know, we might come up with grand strategic mottos or strap lines, and I might, you know, divulge a 10-year vision. But for goodness sake, if we've learned nothing from the pandemic, surely we've learned how futile that is, how in the blink of an eye, everything can change, which is my point about faithfulness in the present moment. You know, at points in my life where I've been most in amidst uncertainty and unknowing, it is really hard because we grasp after control. But all I've been able to do is say, I don't know, Lord. I don't know. I'm trying to stay rooted in this moment and to be faithful in this moment and to keep my eyes up enough so that I'm noticing the world and I'm spotting what may be required of me. In some ways, some people might say, how naive. Maybe I'm open to that. And it's not that I'm not discussing with colleagues and with others, because we have important decisions to make about how we use our resources. These are real questions that we can't ignore. And there aren't easy answers, and there aren't answers that are going to be popular for everybody. But we do our best, but it doesn't amount to a foolproof strategy or vision. So, you know, what I do personally in my life is what I would like to see us modelling more as a diocese. And I'm no expert at it. I haven't got it right, but I try to live by that ideal. Take control, take responsibility where I can, work hard, but ultimately try to discern God's will for now and for the next step. And how we travel is always going to be more important than any destination any one of us may have in mind. That's our calling to the world, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guli. A very quick question. So I would like to provide some, I mean, you may have said this before. Is there one? And also, how can you help in your this particular set of people?
Thank you, Andrew. What I long for all those who are in leadership in the diocese, curates, clergy, LLMs, everybody, is for each of us to feel that sense of confidence in our calling, in knowing who we are and in serving out of that. I see evidence sometimes that, and when I say lack of confidence, I'm not talking about a kind of brassy, bold kind of, stand on the street corners, and that may be right for some people, but I'm not talking about that kind of confidence. I'm talking about that sense of deep security that comes from knowing who we are, knowing we're loved, and being able to minister, and therefore rejoicing in the diversity. So your shape of your ministry will be completely different to somebody else's. There is no competition between us. If we could each, as individuals and as church communities, discover who it is we're called to be, and be that in the security of knowing that we're loved and with great compassion and gentleness towards others, that will, I think, be of great benefit to the life God has, because it will allow us then to really reap the benefits of our diversity, rather than our diversity in all respects being something that divides us and puts barriers up between us. So it's a sense of knowing that you're loved, knowing that you're secure, and that you can be who you are, always having our rough edges smoothed by our interactions with others and taking God's message to us through others seriously. So it's not about kind of me just saying, well, I don't care what anybody else thinks. This is what God is saying to me, because that's not how discernment works in the church. It's always about community and something more complex. So yeah, it's kind of, again, as simple as that. And I think it applies to individuals and it applies to communities, and how you can help me. Thank you, Andrew. I think it seems like an awful note to finish on, to talk about myself. Please pray for me, first and foremost, and please be kind and gentle. I will make mistakes. And not only that, I will say and do things that not all of you will agree with. But I will always pray for you, and I will always do my best. So if we can all be more gentle and kind, kindness is an underrated commodity. More kindness towards one another will go a very long way towards making us a church that is really serving our communities in how we are with one another and modelling something for the right world.
Thank you.